Welcome to the Women in Construction webinar series. Thank you for joining Women Don't Ask. I would like to introduce our speaker, Amy Marks. A pioneer in the construction industry, Ms. Marks is known as the world's preeminent industrialized construction and prefabrication consultant and often referred to as the Queen of Prefab. Ms. Marks serves on the leadership team at Autodesk as the head of industrialized construction strategy and evangelism. In this role, she leverages her passion and years of consulting and fabrication experience to enable and empower the global AEC industry to adopt processes for industrialized construction, including prefabrication and DFMA. Ms. Marks is committed to using her extensive experience, thought leadership, and high profile within the construction industry to promote participation, innovation, and advancement across all industry segments and markets. Knowing the importance of creating a sustainable and thriving industry, Ms. Marks is a fierce advocate for bringing critical attention to the importance of attracting talent pool and creating an industry of inclusion that fosters new perspectives, diversity of thought, and skills to push the boundaries of what's possible in design and construction. She is a passionate speaker on improving business results through increased diversity and belonging, and is often quoted saying, "I'm not a feminist, I'm a capitalist." She is a graduate of the University of Florida and alumna of Harvard Business School. She is a mom to her daughter Mackenzie and an avid sports fan, having played competitive rugby for almost 15 years. I'm so excited to have Amy share her expertise, experiences, and insight on practical strategies to ensure women ask for what they want in a way that's impactful. Amy, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. I am so excited to be here. I'd love to thank the organizers. One of the great things about today is I get to do this on my birthday today. So I'm not afraid of my age. I'm actually 49 today, and I'm excited that I get to speak to all these wonderful men and women that are joining us in the event today. So hopefully you can all see my screen properly. I'm hopeful. And I want to talk a little bit about what's been out there in the news in the last 10 years. And we've seen a lot of articles and a lot of research. And I thought maybe I'd just give you my take on some of the things that we hear about all the time about women don't ask. So let's start with a little bit of a recap of the current articles, books, and thinking that we've seen out there. Some of these studies, thank you for the happy birthday wishes, love that. Some of you have seen some of this, and I just wanted to go through a little bit about it, just so we can all level set and get on the same page. So why women don't negotiate their job offer. I'm sorry, let's talk about nice girls don't ask. Why do we not ask for things like negotiating our job offers and things like that? I think we've just been taught that, again, the way we've been raised, dependent upon where you were raised in the culture, sometimes we think it's not appropriate to ask. So in this study of fresh MBA grads they did at Columbia, it showed that men were 8 times more likely to negotiate their starting salaries and therefore earned about $4,000 more US on average than women, right? So we all hear about like women don't make as much as men for equal roles. Sometimes what we found in some of these studies is that because we didn't ask in the beginning of our careers at our first job, right? A woman sacrifices over $500,000 in earnings in her career just by not asking for that first raise in that first job. So as research reveals, men are 4 times more likely to ask for higher pay than are women with the same qualifications. And from career promotions, when we need potentially help with childcare, it shows that time and time again, women don't even ask for promotions, don't even ask for raises, and don't ask for help, even though they know that they can, or even if they realize that they can, they just don't do it. So I wanted to dispel a little bit of this notion that nice girls don't ask, but it's happening out there. And for those of you, I have a 12-year-old daughter who's turning 12 next week. We have to remind them it's so important in the beginning. Some of us are just thrilled to get the opportunity to work at a company that we forget that it behooves us to really think about our value and to ask for more money like our male counterparts. So why don't we negotiate these job offers, right? I think it's somewhat cultural that we've been raised that way, depending on where we're from or what we think is appropriate to ask. But women pay a higher social cost of negotiating than that of men. And this is the crazy part. In the Columbia study, they noted that both men and women don't see asking or negotiating as socially acceptable, right? So, not just men. So, if I ask for a raise, not only does a man think that that's socially acceptable, but women also think that that's socially acceptable, right? And therefore, we get penalized sometimes with, lack of social capital when we do, or if we get the job, resentment from our coworkers or some of the people that we work with, even our bosses. So it's a little bit difficult. Some of this information is not very easy to hear. We don't ask, therefore, we make less and less compounded over time. And some of the reasons we don't ask is that it's been proven that sometimes we actually are penalized when we ask. And I think we have to recognize that. So, why women don't ask for more money? There's another theory out there that claims that women are better negotiators when they negotiate on behalf of someone else or on behalf of their team. And that's called the mama bear syndrome, right? So, interestingly enough, right before this call, I was on with somebody that I mentor, and we were going through how they need to talk to their the HR counterpart about a position that they want and what they want for that. And I thought about myself. Wow, she actually said to me, I wish I could morph you and you could go in there and ask for me. And I thought, it doesn't work that way. If I was asking for myself, I actually might not be as good as the advice that I'm giving you. That's sort of sometimes we're just better at doing this for other people than we are for ourselves. So we've grown up sometimes doing that, right? So women ask for raises as often as men, but are less likely to get them. That's something that's been proven as well. A new data set shows that women ask as often as men do, but are 5% less likely to get what they ask for. And that doesn't seem like a lot, only 5%. But again, when you compound that over time, after job after job after job, it really does add up at the end of the day. And for those of you who are single moms out there or not married and out on your own, that's a lot of money over time that you need for yourself and in your career, or even if you're the sole provider in your household or you're doing the lion's share of the providing, this money adds up to a lot of money. So we are less likely to get them, 5% less likely. So, Linda Babcock, I can't take credit for the Women Don't Ask book, which is why the full title of this is Or Do We? And What Are the Consequences? But what she wrote about was when women choose a mentor, when they describe the negotiation process, a metaphor, sorry, not a mentor, when they ask, what's it like to negotiate? Like, give me an example of a metaphor that makes sense for you. That a lot of women actually picked going to the dentist. Now, I don't know about you, but going to the dentist for me is a traumatic event. Like I almost need to take a prescription relaxer just to go because it's so awful. I look over at my executive assistant who's sitting there. She knows she has to drive me there and back. So we actually choose the metaphor of a negotiation process is like going to the dentist. Men mostly chose it's like winning a ball game. So if you just think about what this experience is like over time, and even when you're talking to other women about it, getting advice, most of us feel like it's just painful. And we don't look at it in a competitive sense where we've won something and it's really fun and like a ball game like most men do. And in that book, she also noted that 20% of adult women say they don't even negotiate at all, even when it might be appropriate. They just opt out completely about negotiation, which is crazy if you think about it, right? That means somebody actually said to them, is there anything else that you think you need for this? What are you looking for? And they just stopped asking. They actually didn't ask at all. 20%. That's a huge number, right? So why is that happening? And I've already mentioned a couple reasons why that might be happening, but I really want you to think under what circumstances would you not negotiate even if you thought it was appropriate to do so? And I think all of us have done that at one time or another in our lives. And I think sometimes I know when I was younger, I needed to hear women of a particular part in their careers. It was helpful for me to hear them say, yeah, I didn't negotiate. I wasn't as strong as I could have been. Or I took it on the chin. I asked and I paid the consequences for it. We all can't pretend that this is not happening because as the studies are showing, this happens all the time. Some of it is external facing, that, we have to deal with these external issues, and some of it is internal. So we really have to look both inside ourselves and to the communities that's around us and support us to figure out why we're not asking, right? So then if you're asking, there's been a lot of advice, right? This one's from Stanford's Margaret A. Neal. And her advice is if she negotiates for an increase in her salary and she has a male boss, right? The research suggests that the woman will be penalized in a way that the male counterparts will not be. Here's what's even more shocking to me. If they have a female boss, that female boss actually penalizes both males and females. So I often have men that approach me because I've said some things in the industry about how most of the leadership in our particular industry in construction, I've used a different phrase. I won't use it today. I've tried to take it out of my vernacular a bit, but they are typically white men over 55, have been in the industry for a long time. And we'd like to say that that's the reason these things aren't happening for us. But the truth of the matter is that female bosses are just as hard on males and females when we ask for increases in our salary or we ask for things that we need. And I think if you're one of the females on this call that is a manager or a boss, we need to start recognizing that about ourselves. We need to, it's like, you've all had that boss at one time or another, or maybe not, hopefully not, that said, like, when you walked a day in my high heels, then I'll treat you the way that I wanted to be treated. And we're kind of bad at that, right? Some women have told me they'd rather work for a man than a female in the construction industry because we've all had such a tough time. We're harder on ourselves and we're harder on other females, and males as well in the industry, even harder than some of the men that are in this space. So I want us to recognize that there's some responsibility that we have to take as well in this, right? So many of you may have written the Challenger sale, and I hope some of you, I know I saw a couple names coming up, some of you that are in sales, some of you that are in marketing, and we have to know that this was actually one of the hottest books that was out there in sales a couple of years ago. And it talked a lot about, it's not just about salaries, right? It's about contract negotiations, it's about sales and speaking opportunities. But this book in particular, right? Because we know we don't ask for these things, right? We don't ask for, by the way, potential. Men ask for jobs based on their potential. They think and they look through job postings and they go, I could do that. I could actually do that. And women say, oh, of these 9 things, I don't have that skill set. And so they don't apply because they're thinking about themselves based on credentials, right? Contract negotiations, advice, is we ask on behalf of others, for communal benefits. We tend to do that as well. We don't ask for enough speaking opportunities. How many of you have been asked to speak at conferences? And sometimes when we are, it's for the women's panel or the women's event or the women's thing. I personally have discussed with lots of event organizers, I don't want to be on an all-woman event unless we're talking about technical things or we're talking about, whatever our skill set is for the most part. Unless it's something like this where the topic alone is for this, we just don't ask for those opportunities and we need people to ask on our behalf. So, and then sales, right? So let's talk about this Challenger sale book. This is one of those things that it sort of, when I read it, and by the way, for those of you who don't know, I came out of a business development background. And I feel like it's one of my skill sets that I have a very strong skill set in the sales side. So the Challenger sale by Matt Dixon, they broke everybody down actually into these personas, right? The hard worker, the challenger, the relationship builder, the lone wolf, and the problem solver. And they talked about these sales personas, right? So the hard worker, the guy that goes that extra mile, doesn't give up. The challenger is somebody who has a different view of the world and understands the customer's business. The relationship builder, which we typically equate with sales, right? So sales, the relationship builder is typically somebody we think has the strongest sales background. The lone wolf, right? Somebody who follows their own instincts, very self-assured. And then you've got these problem solvers, right? So they're always reliable. They're trying to fix some problems. They're very detail oriented. So they go through these personas, and 40% of the high sales performers were actually used a challenger style as opposed to the other 4 sales styles. High performers in those groups were twice as likely to use a challenger approach than any other approach. And that's why it's actually called the Challenger sale. More than 50% of all all-star performers fit the challenger profile in complex sales. And only 7% of the top performers actually were in that relationship building group. Now, that doesn't make any sense, right? Everybody always says the best sales guys are the salespeople are the people that are doing relationship building. But that's not true. Actually, what they found is it's that challenger, right? The one that always has a different view of the world, that understands the customer business, that, listen to this part, loves to debate and pushes the customer. Those are the best salespeople out there, right? And when I think about people that know how to ask and know how to negotiate, those are salespeople, right? So for those of you who are in that side of the business, those challenger personas are the ones that actually did the best. So why is that hard for us? Like, why does that differentiate for us? What is the challenge, or what are they really doing differently? So they're pushing that customer's thinking, right? They're introducing new solutions to their problems, and they're illuminating problems that customers tend to overlook. So what they looked at in that book was that these top performers that know how to ask, that know how to close deals, that know how to negotiate for themselves, first and foremost, they teach, right? So they want to go over new information with their customers, let them understand what's happening in the market and how they compete. The second thing they do is they tailor their sales pitches that resonate with the decision makers, right? And the third thing they said was they take control of the discussions. They take control around pricing, meaning they're asking for the money, they are dictating what the money should be, and they're challenging customers' thinking around any of the problems that they've had. So when I read this book, and I've always been a top performer in my early days in sales and as a sales manager, I thought, man, if I did all of those things, these are all the words that I have heard in my life that come out over that advice. And I ran into Matt Dixon one day and we had a conversation about this. And I asked him, I think the book really needs a compendium, because I wondered what percentage of the top salespeople that they had talked to were men versus women at these companies. Because I think some of the advice that that book gave are directly in opposition to some of the studies that we just read about, right? About women don't ask and that they're punished for asking in some ways, and that we're better off when we ask for somebody else. And sometimes we don't ask at all, or we don't negotiate at all. And so all those studies and this book that was a bestseller, they didn't really go together for me, right? So again, as a woman in the industry, it's like you hear the advice of what the best people are doing, and you recognize potentially as a woman those things don't really make a lot of sense for you. And I can tell you, these are the nicest words I've ever been called, probably, in my industry and outside of my industry. So I don't think I've had a lot of people actually, and to be honest, funny enough, and I'll tell you some real true stories in this industry. Not long ago, there was a gentleman on a call, and he was younger than me and younger than I am. And we were on a call with three other women that were in marketing. They asked me as a subject matter expert to speak at a conference. This person was actually going to be introducing me, and he was going to be doing all the questioning. He worked for the organization, and I wanted to level set with him on some language around prefabrication. And at one point, he was telling me what he thought prefabrication was, and I explained to him that that's actually not correct. And these are the correct terms that we use in prefabrication, and this is what the correct, vernacular is. And he actually said out in front of three other women, "Why are you being so aggressive with me?" And I thought, well, I'm the subject matter expert on prefabrication that you've asked to speak at this conference, that you pay to speak at this conference. I think you want to say the right terminology, and that's my expertise. So I confronted him about it actually in the meeting. And the three women that were on the call, they were probably in their 30s. I'm obviously a lot older. I've told you it's my 49th birthday. And I thought, I have a choice here. I could let this slide. But then I looked around the room, and oftentimes I am not in a room with other women. I'm often the only woman in the room. And I thought, I don't ever really let these things slide, but I certainly can't let them slide now, right? So I actually confronted him and said, this really needs to stop. You can't call women aggressive, and certainly not me in this meeting, because I've been here as a subject matter expert. This is not my company speaking, this is myself speaking. And actually, the gentleman got so uncomfortable that he excused himself off the phone call. I've heard later that he's actually apologized to the women that he works with about the call. But I said to the women that were left on the call, listen, we can't let that slide in our industry. You cannot let a man call us aggressive when we are talking about something that we have knowledge about, and that we may have more knowledge than they do about it in this particular case. And I said, I hope if I'm not on a future call, if that ever happens to any one of you, that you guys will stick up for each other, and that you ladies will stick up for each other. That's so important. So I've been called lots of these words over time, sometimes well-deserved. And by the way, I think most people know that I'm going to talk about it later because it's almost like, they're pretty aware that I'm out there in the space. I'll tell you another story I think is very important as we go through. I feel like we have to be really honest as senior women of the things we've actually gone through in life. If we just sugarcoat it and pretend these things don't happen on a daily basis or a weekly basis or a monthly basis, I'm not doing anybody any kind of service, right? So you're not learning how to deal with the real things that are happening. And we just talk about tactics that come into play only a small percentage of the time instead of the real tactics that you need. In this case, I was very lucky. I was able to speak, my mind, which I mostly do all the time anyway. But I think if there were three men on the call and this gentleman, it would have been a very different outcome than him excusing himself and apologizing. So I like to think of that. What would have happened if I was the only woman, as I often am, in some of those situations? So, how do we reconcile some of the advice in books like The Challenger Sale with what actually happens, especially in our industry as a male dominated industry? And most women that have been in this space, um, you know, what are they doing on a daily basis for tactics when these things are actually happening? And there's some thoughts on this out in the world, some of which I agree with and some of which I don't, but it's all personal for you. So there's this relational account or the I we strategy. And this came from Why Women Don't Negotiate Their Job Offers with Hannah Riley Bowles from the Harvard Business Review. So the first thing you can do as a strategy is explain when you're negotiating with your counterpart why, in their eyes, it's legitimate for you to be negotiating. So things like I had a job once where I was trying to win the job to build a building for a big company, and they thought I was incredibly aggressive. And I said, I get that, but I own the company and I'm responsible for everybody paying their mortgages. And one day I will be, negotiating with you, like for you. And it really behooves me. I have to be a great negotiator. I'm going to negotiate just as hard when I have to negotiate your subcontractor contracts. So I feel like in some ways we are taught to, and I hate to use this word, soften the blow of our language by explaining to them why we have the rights to negotiate. And again, I said some of these strategies that I believe in, and some of them I have a hard time reconciling with my authentic self. But that is one strategy that you can say something like, I'm going to negotiate future contracts for you. So you want me to be a good negotiator, right? You want me to call people out on things that aren't real because I'm going to do that on your behalf for yourself. The second thing you can do is signal to your negotiation counterpart that you care about organizational relationships. So, as women, we're often looked at as caretakers and caregivers. So, something like, and they use this phrase, we are going to be partners on this project. So, this is the only time we're ever going to be across the table from each other. And then, we will be on the same side of the table. So, let's just do this dirty work, basically, get this very uncomfortable thing over. And then, we'll be on the same team. So some of these leave a really bad taste in my mouth. I have to be honest with you. On the other hand, sometimes I've employed these strategies and unfortunately they've worked, right? And I have to be honest, there's in some cultures, I've actually met with my attorney who was a male and had him go in and negotiate for me because I knew that it would hurt our company if I went in and negotiated for myself. And I really wanted to win a job. And I knew that in that particular part of the world, it wouldn't help me to be the one that was the most outspoken at the negotiation table. And that's hard, right? So I just want to let you know that we all have to take it, or don't have to, but we all choose it sometimes to take it on the chin for other reasons. And I think I saw Ryan McMahon join. He's actually my director of products over at Autodesk. I think he's on the call as well. And I know he's seen both sides of that for me. He's seen me take it on the chin and he's seen me be able to be my complete authentic self. And I think as long as we recognize that we're utilizing these as strategies and we're doing this to have a means to an end. And as a good friend just told me recently, sometimes it's better to be effective than it is to be right, depending on what your goals are, right? So a really wonderful woman just told me that the other day. And I think that's important. We have to really think about balancing some of these strategies that we hear about all the time. And I know you know them. My favorite one is always this, and it's the one that drives me crazy, but I'm not going to lie. I've actually used it many times when we sit in meetings and we have to say, I'm sure you've thought of this before, but this idea might be to do something. It's like, why can't I just have my own unique, authentic idea that's great that I came up with that no one else has thought of? And we know that that happens, right? So you can utilize that strategy of saying, I'm sure you've thought of this before, or maybe you might have had a question about something like this, or maybe you've tried this. As much as we'd like to say that we would love to be able to just say our ideas, oftentimes, sometimes these strategies actually help us. So you have to balance that with your personality and your authentic self and the things that you feel comfortable saying, right? So I want to put that out there about the I we strategy and any of those that you decide to use. So, what can we do? Like, as a person alone, what can you actually do to make a difference? So, you can keep asking. That's number one. I say all the time to my 12-year-old, if you don't ask, you don't get, like, period. So, at the end of the day, when she was very little, obviously she sees mommy asking for things all the time. And you just have to keep practicing at that. We actually have to make it more socially acceptable to ask. We have to desensitize women and men to hearing women ask for what they want, right? You have to be aware of the issues and use appropriate strategies. Honestly, in that scenario where I decided to let my attorney negotiate, I felt that it wasn't worth it and that I wanted the job more than to be my authentic self at the negotiation table, when the end result was that we won the job and were able to get the business in, which was the best thing for my company at the time. One of the other things that I'll mention is consider getting a coach and consider getting more than one coach for different things. I actually have an amazing coach, Hakimia, that I'll talk a little bit about with Divinely Powered. She's amazing, but consider getting a coach. That's very important. Somebody who doesn't work for your company, somebody who has experience and a skill set and an education in coaching that coaches and is used to coaching females. Oftentimes, and especially female leaders, if you're in leadership, a lot of times I've been offered coaches, but coaches that have only worked with men and that think some of the things I talk about, it's impossible that they could even happen because they're just not acclimated to hearing the language that I use or hearing how people talk to me and what they say. I think we have to be aware also that you need more than one mentor. And I'll discuss the difference between a mentor and a sponsor in a minute, but you do have to get advice from mentors. When we're talking about coaches and mentors, somebody was telling me about Steph Curry, who's a basketball player. I don't really follow basketball for the most part, but I'm more of a rugby fan, as we said. But they were telling me that he has a 2-point shooter coach, a 3-point shot coach. He's got, a defensive coach. He's got about 7 different coaches, and they all have their own specialty. I really feel that way about mentors. Like I have some people that I've talked to for advice in the mentor role that have very good skill set in negotiation, some that do not. Some that have very good skill set in playing nice, with large groups to be collaborative, and some that do not. So remember that it's really hard to find a mentor or a coach in that sense that fits all of your needs. You definitely need to get help from sponsors. And I'll talk a little bit about that as we move forward in the next couple of minutes. But I think what you can always do is just be your authentic self and balancing that out with some of the strategies. But ultimately, you want to feel comfortable in your own skin. And so, what does that mean? It means, I have a friend that's looking for a job right now, and she wrote her resume and thought, this is a great resume, isn't it, to put out there? And I said, what if you wrote a different kind of resume and did a personal statement about the kind of company that you're looking for and the kind of culture you're looking for and the kind of people that you want to work with, right? How that you can really react and be your authentic self in those situations. And she did. She wrote a personal statement about herself, the kind of company she was looking for. And actually, she has a lot more people looking at her resume because she was able to articulate that more than just her skill set. Because these days, people are looking for the right fit for their teams, not necessarily just the most experienced person that fits with their team. I know my teammates are on here. The number one thing, we have an open position right now at Autodesk for my team, and I'm looking for somebody that first fits within the culture of my group. Because I know that my group is a very special group, and we have, authenticity as one of our drivers for our own personalities. And so we need somebody who can really function in that way, right? So be your authentic self, communicate to people what your authentic self is. I think part of that is being vulnerable. We like to work with the table group at Autodesk as an example, and being a vulnerable leader is important. For any of you that have worked with me in the past, most people know one of the first things I say about myself is that I'm a verbal learner and that I have to repeat myself in order for me to process things. So I let people know that a lot of times it sounds like I'm telling them to do stuff, but in reality, I'm just asking a question because I have to verbalize something in order for myself to understand it. So whatever those things are for you, how you work better. Like I also say, I hate to do homework. I love to work live and collaboratively. I'm much more productive when I do that. Whatever those things are that make you more productive at work, share them about yourself. Share them. Share those things with your the people that you're interviewing with, and I think you'll end up in better roles, and you'll also get promotions for the right roles for you because again, it's less about selling yourself into the position and more about being your happy, authentic self at the end of the day. I mentioned about coaching. I'm a big believer in coaching at Autodesk. We're very lucky that we get coaching through Bravely. I'm extremely lucky that I work with Hakimia from Divinely Powered, and I've had a lot of great experience with coaching, especially with Hakimia on coaching successes. Anything having to do with people management, leadership, how I can get more focused on things. What strategy I want to take. Most of my coaching these days revolves around my team and how I'm going to build up my team and make my team happier, and how I'm going to get my teammates to be at the places that they can function most effectively. And so I find that my coaching, which by the way, maybe somewhat unorthodox, I have my executive assistant, Karen, who's been with me for 15 years. She actually attends my coaching sessions because she's my anchor. She spends more time with me than anybody on this planet. And I want to make sure that she understands some of the tactics I'm trying to practice and employ so that she can call me out on it. So I think not only is it great to have coaching and you need mentors and sponsors, which we'll go over next, but you also need people that you surround yourself with that you're very honest and vulnerable with that can call you out on things that when you're not actually working at your most optimal. That might be the nicest way I ever said that. You're not working at your most optimal. So let's talk a little bit about difference from mentors and sponsors. I have to be honest, I haven't had a lot of great mentors in my lifetime. I was usually the only woman that walked in the room at most of the places I ever went. But a mentor is anyone that's in a position with experience, and you want them to really give you some advice and support. In some ways, I probably stopped myself from getting some good mentors because I felt like I got so much advice all the time, being the only woman in the room, that I just couldn't take any more of it, to be honest. And that was wrong. I feel like I could have benefited from, even if they weren't women, from getting a really diverse group of mentors, like that 2-point coach or the 3-point coach or the foul line, shooter coach. I hope I said the right basketball terminology. But having a myriad of different coaches. By the way, I often use shoes and couture as analogies in our business. And I find that most men have no idea what I'm talking about. So I've had to learn a little bit about sports over time because not many of the people in our industry know what Jimmy Choos are, or, Manolo Blahniks. So I've really changed my vernacular a little bit over time. But the difference between mentors and sponsors is that sponsors actually advocate for you. When I think about sponsors, I had a certified woman-owned business prior to coming to Autodesk. And I actually think about one client in particular. His name is Nigel Bailiff. And Nigel probably has no idea I'm talking about him today. But in an industry full of about 99.9% men, he always gave me a chance. And he gave us jobs. And he always gave me the benefit of the doubt. And I feel like he was a really great sponsor for me. He also gave me some advice. But in reality, sponsors put their reputation out on the line for you. And you have to have more than one. You've got to seek out and you've got to clearly ask for sponsors. I find that if we're clear with them that we need them as a sponsor, then they recognize, if you explain to them what it means to you to have a sponsor, what they have to do. So I think it's important to have both mentors and sponsors in your lifetime. And again, you get through different phases in your life where you need different types of mentors or different kinds of sponsors. And it's okay to really talk about what you're good at and what you're not. I can definitely tell you, I wanted to tell this story that happened to me recently in the last couple of weeks, where I went, as I would say, toe to toe with somebody that I consider like a chess beater in the industry. And I think as women, we all know those types of people that want to just tell us all about their years of experience. And basically, while I was in the cradle, they were building buildings. And how could I possibly know more about the topic than they do? And I call those people chess beaters, right? And I know that I personally don't do very well with chess beaters because, as you heard, I'm a competitive rugby player. And so my strategy has always been just to pummel them into the ground. That's what rugby players do. I was a tight head prop. I tackle people. I put them down on the ground. So that's all I kind of know how to do. But I was talking actually to a really wonderful mentor for me. And I said, look, I know that I didn't handle that situation that well. I don't really have any tactics for dealing with chest beaters that have ever worked. I literally said back to my mentor, I would really like to act differently, but I don't know how, to be honest. Now, I'm almost 50 years old and I've been in this business a long time. I really looked across my skill set and thought, I got nothing. And I said, what do you like? What can you help me with? Because I could just keep saying sorry, or I could start practicing a skill that I don't have, but at least I'll be practicing it for later. And actually, it was interesting. The advice he gave me, and it was a man that gave me the advice, was he said, look, you're beating on your chest telling people, how much experience you have versus how much experience they have. But in reality, you could just start asking questions and start asking questions about things that you know about, things you need to know about. And that would really diffuse the situation, because once you start asking questions, that other person will stop telling you how long they've been in the business, and they'll try to start focusing on the questions. And he was like, use your intellect, almost as a weapon instead of your brute force. And I thought, wow, I've never really tried to do that. And so for me, one of the important things about Women Don't Ask is I think we have to ask for help all the time. So I'll be honest. I told you one of my coworkers is here on the phone with me, really my director of product over at Autodesk. I said, hey, Ryan, I'll let you know that I didn't handle myself well in this other meeting this one day. I don't have that skill set, but I got this advice and I'm going to try to ask some questions. So I said, I really need your help with this. If you notice that I'm getting agitated in one of these meetings ever again, we almost need like something that snaps me out of it. Like, hey, Amy, weren't we talking about some questions before we came today? What about the one you asked me about XYZ? So I actually asked Ryan for some help, that if he notices that I'm getting agitated in these meetings, I could, he could step in. I give him full authority to step in and try to redirect this into some intelligent conversation and questions. So it's okay to show that you're vulnerable. And I think Ryan and I both talked about it, and we came up with like the way in which he's going to do that, so it's respectful for both of us. And actually, to be honest, we practiced it like several days later in another meeting where I was a little bit frustrated. I didn't understand some of the concepts. And he decided to employ that strategy, and he's like, did you notice that I said, like, what about these questions? And I said, it's funny, I didn't even notice, but it shifted the whole conversation. And so I think it's really important that we're open and honest about where we have skill set and where we don't, and that we really get some allies on our side to help us learn new skills that maybe allow us to still be our authentic self, but not come into so many issues. Because I think a lot of times I meet a lot of women, unfortunately, in the space, that have been told to act softer, be a softer manager, soft, 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 and you'll get further if you. And I just don't have those skills. It's not something that I was brought up in. I grew up in the construction industry. I played competitive rugby. I'm from New York. I don't really have a lot of those inherent skill sets of. I think I'm a core facilitator. And I think harmony is my 34th talent. And right above that is, adaptability and empathy and those types of things. So, but I think in reality, I always make the joke sometimes that I'm a bunny in a monster costume at work. And, people don't get to know the bunny side of me until I become vulnerable. And like Karen, my EA, is laughing when she hears me say that, because that I'm really a bunny, right? Like I really care a lot and I'm passionate. But sometimes I forget that I'm not speaking the same language as other people. And I need to let them in to my softer side so that I can, not even my softer side, just the side where I'm not as defensive or I'm not as aggressive, because I really, really want to share my passion and my knowledge. And I have to, it takes a little while for people to get to know us. I think, what can we all do? I think we have to keep asking, right? That's super important. And I think we have to keep also telling people and learning about ourselves so that we can be better at what we're doing, so that I can get my messaging across better and still remain authentic to myself, right? So I want to be effective. I love to be right, but I also want to be effective. And I think sometimes we forget that, right? I think we have to stop woman on woman crime. That's one of my favorite things to say. We've got to make it more socially acceptable for women to ask. We've got to encourage women to take and apply for jobs on their potential, not just on their credentials. We have to speak out when we see microaggressions happening for other people, not just for ourselves. And we have to make sure that we make it a safe environment for people with, diversity in thought. I always say in brainstorming sessions, the worst ideas lead to the best ideas, right? And you can't have collaboration without conflict. So in my culture, in my group, we really admire people that speak up and are courageous enough to speak up, especially at Autodesk, that have the courage to speak up and make decisions. That's really important. I think specifically with women, we have to use our knowledge as capital with each other. We have to use our positions as capital. We can't lord them over people. We have to trade them with each other to bring us all up in the industry. It's that comment, Nancy Novak. I just wrote her a note today on my birthday message. She put a picture of a tiara up for me and said, you know, happy birthday, queen. And I was like, she's one of my friends that I know will like dust off my tiara in the industry instead of trying to pull it off my head. So we have to really look for other women in this space and be a woman in this space that will actually help other women. That's super important. Stop women on women crime. Be a mentor or a sponsor. You know, I at Autodesk, I'm really lucky. We have an amazing mentorship program that I've joined now as a mentor, which when you're getting in that, you know, the older years of your career and senior leadership, sometimes it's hard for me to remember that I'm somebody that's older, that's done a lot of stuff in my career. I would say my style of mentoring is storytelling about myself and learning more about the other person and what they encounter. And I will tell you today, to somebody that I mentored, they were saying how nice it was that somebody who worked for them told them how great they were. Now, this is a person that's just like me. That's why I mentor that person. They've been told to be softer in their lots over their lifetime in reviews. And she picked me as a mentor because she sees in me probably like how I am, how she is as well. And she was telling me a story of how one of her coworkers that works for her, one of her people that works for her, was saying how excited they were to work for her, that they were going to learn so much from her. And her immediate response, interestingly, was, why doesn't like I want like why aren't these people saying that to me? And why don't they recognize that and I said, all right, that's true, but we could say all those things, or we could just pause on the moment that somebody is saying those things to you and does want you to teach them and thinks you have a lot of knowledge and wants to learn from you. And let's just put all that other stuff aside and focus on this, because we have to really think about some of the situations that are happening to us as opposed to the situations that we wish would happen to us. And I think it's important to note that, because we can always say, well, if I wasn't here, this would happen. And these people, they'll miss me when I'm gone. And I was explaining to a different mentee that I have, that's great, but it's almost like an ex-boyfriend. They never really recognize your value even when you're gone. So you just have to forget about them and move on. And the best thing you can do is just be successful for yourself, right? So we can't really think about what things aren't happening for us. And we should celebrate with each other and for others in the industry what's happening to them, right? And the more we have that gratitude and appreciation for things happening to ourselves and to the people that we know, the more good things I believe karma will come back to us. The other thing it does for you is it really frees up your headspace. So the more authentic you are and the less you have to worry about these things, just the more productive you are. So I know for myself, the less defensive I am, the better my brain works. And I have a lot more space to be collaborative and a lot more space to actually be smarter in meetings. So just remember, if you truly want to be your best self, let go of a lot of that stuff and make some space for yourself to be the best version of yourself. Champions, I know there are not just women on this call. And if you think that we can do this without our male counterparts, we cannot. So we need our champions of women to please speak up. I've been in plenty of meetings. I am really lucky that Jim Lynch is my direct boss at Autodesk. He's the first man in any meeting. If a woman says an idea and somebody repeats it after them 5 minutes later, he will say, without even noticing, that's great that you have consensus with Amy's idea she mentioned 5 minutes ago. We need champions like that. We need managers like that, that recognize that these things happen all day, just because not with harm intended, but they don't really recognize these microaggressions happening, and that really speak up and course correct the conversations or course correct what's happening. I'm just so lucky that I actually have an amazing manager in Jim Lynch, that he recognizes those things and corrects them even without knowing. He's just that kind of a person. The culture at Autodesk is that kind of a place. So we have to embrace the authenticity of others. And I would, again, look to my teammates. I've been really lucky at Autodesk that I've surrounded myself with a great team that we truly appreciate our authentic selves, and that we're open to other people's authentic selves, which maybe people from the outside think we might look a little quirky. But I think at the end of the day, we're really productive because of that, because you work best when you're being your authentic self and working within your talents. So I want to leave a lot of space for questions today. And I think the last thing I'll leave you with is, ladies that are on the call and pretty much everybody else, if you don't ask, you don't get. That's super important at the very baseline of this. There might be consequences. You might need to have other strategies. You may not be doing exactly what the best salespeople are doing in the way in which they think it's most successful. But at the end of the day, you don't ever get anything that you don't ask for, right? So you miss out. What is there's a sports analogy. One of my friends will have to help me on the call, but what is it? You miss 100% of the shots you don't take. I think that's actually what it is. You miss 100% of the shots you don't take. So take more shots, right? And you know what? It's good to hear no sometimes. That's okay. You can come back and say no, but, or no, have you thought of this? Or no, but here's why I think you should say yes. And I think that gives us and stretches our muscles. So I want to make sure that you know that I'm a big proponent of women and other young people and diverse populations and men in this industry as well. And I'm really good about usually responding to people on LinkedIn. I'm also on Peloton. I just hit my 100th ride during COVID, and I just increased my FTP test for those of you who are Pelotoners. So reach out to me at Queen of Prefab on LinkedIn if you don't get your question answered here. But and also feel free to high five me on Peloton during COVID and any other time. So with that, I think I'm going to take over some questions.
Amazing. Just first of all, thank you so much, Amy. That was so insightful. And throughout your entire presentation, messages were coming in. Obviously, what you were saying was resonating with so many of our audience members. So we have a few questions that have come in. So I'll try pick all of them and hopefully we have time to answer them. So the first one came in privately about halfway through, which is, if you do ask but don't get what you want, how do you keep going?
Well, I think you have to then make an assessment. If you don't get what you want, first you need to understand why. Why didn't you get what you want? Is it something that you need to work on? Make sure you get feedback on why you didn't get the promotion or the raise or a job change. So try to get some feedback. And then you really do need to internalize it and talk about it with others to see if, what parts of that are really valid for you. Ultimately, if you don't get what you want, I know plenty of women that have actually moved to other companies, if it's something like a job, where they found a situation that was just better for them. And that's okay. It's everybody, it's a free, at least where we live right now, you live in a free country, you can go and work for anybody. Or sometimes, like I did for a long time, I went and opened up my own company and worked for myself to create a culture that was different. So assess why the answer was no. You should go back and ask again if you feel like they didn't understand or that you have other evidence of why. And ultimately, if you don't get what you want, you have a choice, to continue on and gain those skills or to move on and get them elsewhere.
Amazing. And that's the second question is, do you have any suggestions on how to find mentors outside of your company, especially if you've been there for 10 years plus?
So I believe at events like this and speakers, we hear a lot of great women talk. And even though I always say, like, you can reach out to me, some people do reach out to me and some people don't. And if I'm not the right mentor for them, sometimes I know somebody who is. LinkedIn is great for that. Just start following some people on LinkedIn that you admire and you read what their articles are, what they talk about, and just approach them and ask them, if they could be your mentor. And if not, could they make a recommendation that you're specifically looking for somebody outside of your company? So LinkedIn's a great place. Coaching's a great place because, again, they have no agenda. Hakimia, I always funny when we start our sessions, I always think we have nothing to talk about. And then we have something amazing Karen's laughing. We have something amazing to talk about after. And then we're like, wow, imagine if we had canceled that. We wouldn't have learned X, Y, and Z. So yeah, coaches are good. They can also recommend some people.
Perfect. And then the third and final question, how often should we ask for a raise or promotion? Because of COVID, some companies have had to let go of employees or even deduct salaries. Is it a good idea to ask for a raise? Would that make the person look inconsiderate?
Oosh, that's a tough one. That's a tough one right now. I would say it depends on your company, right? So I practice gratitude every day that I started working for Autodesk in February. And prior to that, interestingly enough, sorry, that's my daughter coming in to say hello to all the women out there.
Hello.
This is Mackenzie. This is the reason that I have to keep doing these talks so that we change the world for people like girls like Mackenzie. So,
Oops, I just knocked over
that's okay.
something.
So it's okay. So the answer would probably be this. I would say yes, you can't be tone deaf to what's going on in the industry right now. You have to assess right now if timing for your company, if it's even feasible for you to get a raise. I think um, it's good to test that out with some of the people that you know that are potentially mentors in your space. And I think also if you are truly taking on multiple roles and different skill sets, sorry, we have a very loud door in my office. If you are taking on different roles or different skill sets, you may want to discuss that even if you're deferring it for later, that you are making your bosses and your executives aware that you recognize that this is not the right timing for this, and you're willing to do this work and you want to do this work, but that at some future time when things are different, you would like to make sure that they're open to the conversation of some sort of promotion or a raise. I think you have to set the tone. And I think you, again, don't be tone deaf, but you have to set the tone a little bit.
Thank you. So we've just had one more come in, and this will be the last one. So just first of all, saying thank you, Amy, for such a great conversation. I'm interested to learn more about coaches and how to evaluate who is the best person for you. Also, did your employer sponsor your coach?
My employer does. We're very lucky that we have Bravely, which Hakimia is a part of actually at Autodesk. So I am very lucky that we get free coaching over at Autodesk, and that's been really helpful. In the past, I've actually paid for coaching, very expensive coaching. So it's actually one of the benefits that I encourage the teammates that I work with to make sure that they utilize. So what's important for me as looking for a coach, to be honest, is somebody who can see a little bit about my perspective, but isn't so aligned with me that they don't challenge me. I think also it's very important for you to check your coach's credentials. Hakimia has master's degrees, I think, in organizational development, and she's amazing in the sense that she's very well educated, which aside from being educated, gives her she's very well read and she has a lot of strategies and tactics. I would definitely interview coaches and find out about their education level, what they're reading at the time, what kinds of people they've actually coached, and what are some of the topics they've coached them through, to give you examples of some of the challenges they've had with some of their clients as coaches. As a woman, I always want to understand what experience they've had with women that have worked in male dominated industries, because that's different. If you're working in an all female industry, your challenges are different than they are if you're the only woman in the room or one of very few women in the room. I think the other thing is you should ask your friends. I have a lot of really strong women friends, luckily. Sandra Benson and Nancy Novak, and I'm sorry, like they're all not coming. Mona Weisberg, they're all in my group of friends that we've talked about this. What coaches do they know? Who do they work with? Do they know anyone that has dealt with this before? I actually want Kat Wolf, who's at Autodesk, actually just recommended a specific type of coach for me to deal with the situations that we talked about earlier in the call. I think if you're just open to asking about it, people want to share and they want to help. So make sure you find out about their credentials, their education, the challenges, and then ask around, like get some great references. But yeah, I'm really thankful for Autodesk that they provide us with Bravely coaching at no cost to the employees.
Amazing. Thank you so much for answering all those questions. And just once again, thank you so much, Amy, for sharing your insight, but also your experiences and journey. I definitely learned a lot, not working in the construction industry, but definitely picked up a few things that I can utilize myself. So as Amy mentioned, please take screenshots of this last slide. So obviously you can follow up. But Amy, any parting words before we end the webinar?
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, you have to work within your talents and you have to be your authentic self. And don't ever put yourself in a situation where the majority of the time you cannot be your authentic self, because that's what's going to make you happiest. And so really think about that as much as you can when choosing a new position or thinking about moving to a different role. Just be your authentic self so you can be happy to work within your talents.
Amazing. Thank you, Amy. Thank you for everyone who's joined and obviously sent through their questions. And for those in America, I hope you have a great day ahead of you. For those in UK and Europe, I hope you have a great evening. And thank you for joining Amy Mark's webinar on Women Don't Ask. Thank you.
Thank you, guys.